Today we're going to be talking about Parasite Eve 2. Parasite Eve 2 was the sequel to Parasite Eve 1 for the PlayStation 1. Parasite Eve 2 contains some of the best of what the PS1 has to offer, as well as being so extremely far removed from the Parasite Eve series to date. What does that mean? Well, we started this franchise with a book written by a Mr. Senna. I think his name was Hideaki Senna. But it was written by him. He was in the medical pharmaceutical business. And when it was translated into English, it didn't really do too well because it read more like a medical journal or whatever, more than an actual story. Perspective. I still want to read it. I'd still love to get a copy of this book in English, in a language that I can understand. And I did do a little bit more extra research about this book, and found that it is still in print in Japanese. You could still pick up Japanese copies of this book, Parasite Eve by Mr. Senna, for about $30. New $30 US after transferring currencies and shipping and all that other stuff. It'd be $30 to $40 and some change, etc. But it's still doable. You can still pick up Japanese copies in Japanese of this book. It is still in print technically, but it is not in print in English unless you wish to pick up the Kindle version. You can pick up the Kindle version at any time. I don't understand how the Kindle version is there, but there's no print hard copy version. Honestly, if they're worried about not moving enough copies and having it at a loss, then do what the KDP printing press does. I can explain what it means in a bit. We have in a KDP type of thing, like with my author biz, pick up a book if you like. You go to the website onto Amazon, you find the book that you want that is self-published through KDP, paperback or hard copy, hardback, and you pick whichever format you want. These copies have not been made yet until after you have pressed buy. You buy it, the money gets sent over. That money pays to have that book manufactured. The price to manufacture is included in the price to purchase, if that makes sense. So after you purchase it and they manufacture it, then they ship over that copy that was made specifically for you. And then you'll have your handy-dandy copy. And it is made at no loss to any party involved. So nobody's losing money when you buy it this way. You lose money when you mass produce a bunch of copies and you don't move all of the copies that you have produced. That way you have it at a loss. For example, if you mass produced 50,000 copies of a book for a markdown price of X per book, and you sell each copy at a price of X per book, and you only sell 30,000 copies at that price, you are not moving enough to turn a profit. And at least you're not moving enough to turn a good of a profit. They want all 50,000 copies moved, ideally. So when that happens, when not enough copies are moved, they stop it. They just say, alright, you know what, this ain't working, let's stop moving them. But I like the way that the KDP but it is a little bit more expensive doing it the KDP way, because you're making it one at a time. You're ordering them one at a time, so the price goes up a little bit. When you're mass producing them a bulk all at once, it's cheaper per unit price to do it that way. So it makes sense. That's why your mass market paperbacks can be $6 to $9, whereas the trade paperback individual on a whatever merge per purchase basis that I just mentioned is usually more money because it's not at that markdown price for bulk making this. At least that's to my knowledge of what's going on here. Okay? So there's the book. Right? The book was made, and it's a good story. It was adapted into a movie, which is a decent movie. I plan to pick that one up, at least. I know the copies of that are still circulating at a decent price. So I plan to get a DVD copy of that, NTSC. That's the region code, because DVDs have region locks for some strange reason. What else? Then the PS1 version of Parasite Eve is made by Square Enix, with Senna, the original author of the story, on board. The PS1 game was a sequel to this book. This being a sequel to the sequel of a book made by a team that did not make the first game. And the writer of the book was also not involved. So this is the most removed from the original Parasite Eve story as you can get. It's adapted by a bunch of people that did not work on the first Parasite Eve game. The writer, the author, Senna, was not involved in Parasite Eve 2, to my knowledge. Instead, the lead storyboard artist, designer, person who worked on the first Resident Evil game and the Resident Evil story, he was involved in Parasite Eve 2's story. And a lot of other people, besides a bunch of other people from other departments or whatnot who didn't work on the first game, worked on this one. And that storyboard guy for Resident Evil probably brought over a bunch of his friends from Resident Evil. That's why Parasite Eve 2 plays like Resident Evil. It doesn't play like Parasite Eve 1, it plays like Resident Evil. This might just be because of the tank control, survival horror-esque method was popular at the time. This might just be that. They're trying to move this to sell it like Resident Evil, which sold like hotcakes. It sold like firecrackers. It was really hot at the time. So they hoped Resident Evil 2 would move to that type of crowd. And I find that Parasite Eve 2 has a rather divisive crowd. Fans of JRPGs in general, fans of the first Parasite Eve, fans of the book Parasite Eve, fans of that original story, of that original mythos and all its science stuff involved, fans of that tend not to be as big of a fan of Parasite Eve 2. However, fans of Resident Evil, fans of Silent Hill, fans of the survival horror genre, fans of the tank controls of the PS1 era, fans of that tend to love Parasite Eve 2. And that's the visionary thing that I want to talk about here, is that you could have a bunch of people from other departments love Parasite Eve 2, but it's still part of this original franchise. And a lot of these guys didn't really take too kindly to what Parasite Eve 2 changed. It changed it quite a bit from the science and the lore of the first Parasite Eve and all that other stuff. It's because the guy who made Parasite Eve was actually in the pharmaceutical medical stuff, and he knew his science, he knew all that stuff, and that's what he wrote down from those perspectives, from that knowledge. This feels like it was written by the guy who wrote Resident Evil. And it was written by the guy who wrote Resident Evil. And Resident Evil's a really good story, but it's not Parasite Eve. Resident Evil is not Parasite Eve. Parasite Eve 2 is trying to be Resident Evil when it's supposed to be Parasite Eve. Although, I eventually found myself a little bit forgiving of the thing that I absolutely despised and ranted about for nearly 20 minutes in the first Parasite Eve review, and that is the tank controls. I said I wouldn't rant about them in this sequel review, so I'm not going to. I got used to them. I still despise them. I still would prefer that they not exist. And if they do exist, I would prefer that they changed it a little bit. See, we have here a PlayStation 3 controller here, right? We have the controller. And the design of this controller, at least up to the PlayStation 3, has not changed too much since the PlayStation 1, except with the addition of this PSN button. If you ignore that, then all the other button layouts are the same since the very first PS1 controller with analog support. Analog support has existed since 1990, I want to say 97. Parasite Eve 2 came out in 99, which means it was developed during a time period where analog support games were already a big thing. So why is it when we're playing this game we have movement tied to this analog stick and we have no support at all to this analog stick? This analog stick does absolutely nothing. Normally in later games that were released, we have this controlling your camera. It controls your perspective. If you, for example, if you move this analog stick in this direction, your character would start turning in that direction. Your character would look in this direction. If you moved over here, you would look up, you would look down, etc. This would be where your character's looking, and this would be more for moving. So, if you have your tank controls, and then I'm going to be making another video about these type of tanky type of controls with Alice, American McGee's Alice. I plan to make a video about that next. But in that game, we're just going to spoil a little bit about that. In that game, movement was with this analog stick, the left analog stick. And then lookingness was with this analog stick, so you could press this button to go forwards. You could just run straight, and if I moved this one in this direction, then you would have your character starting to turn. Your character could turn. Despite just going forward on this analog stick, you're turning with this analog stick. And that is how I would prefer your tank controls be used, with both analog sticks. Instead, with Parasite Eve 2, everything is done on a single analog stick, which I despise because you're not making total use of both analog sticks. As I've said before, movement going forwards and backwards should have been on this analog stick. Movement to turn left and right should have been on this analog stick. That way you could have full range movement by using both of the analog sticks as you desire. But sadly, we did not get this. And we did not get this in an era when we could have gotten this, because these controllers were already out by then. They were released in 97. We have had 2 years to implement controls properly with analog sticks by this point in time. But they didn't do it. Such a pity, honestly. Tank controls can be used with the D-pad easily enough, but they can be used even better by utilizing both analog sticks, in my opinion, of course. But I got used to it. I did. After a few hours, I got used to the analog sticks tank controls, and I would play through it with some hiccups here and there. Whenever I got into combat, I didn't have my character move at all, unless I just needed to reposition myself to aim at the guy I'm trying to shoot and take it out. You can, bring this back out, you can target your enemies with the square button. You target them, auto-target. You press the square button to auto-target them, and then you fire with the R1 button. Your secondary fire is with R2. I like this. I like utilizing these triggers for that. That's excellent. Your menu is still opened up with triangle to my knowledge. I'm trying to remember the button layout here. I haven't played in a few days. Movement is with both the directional key, the D-pad, and with the left analog stick. Both of them will do the exact same things. So if you wanted, I suppose you could try to finagle using movement like this, holding the control like this, and moving forward with this, and using the left and right D-pad on this side to have the same type of movement as you would if you were able to use the but no, it's a little bit too unwieldy to do that, though that you could have. I do like the improvement over Parasite Eve 1, though. And like I said in Parasite Eve 1, there's 2 controller modes on the PS Series PSN version. You have digital mode, which means all of your movement is stuck with the D-pad and there's no analog support. And then there's analog mode, which is the analog support. In analog mode, the D-pad has been disabled in Parasite Eve 1, so you can't use this to navigate the menus. You can only navigate your menus with this analog stick. This one still had no support. In Parasite Eve 2, that problem seems to have been fixed, because during analog mode, the D-pad is still in function. You can still navigate your menus with the D-pad in analog mode and move with the left analog stick. So that has all been improved, and it's all fantastic with that. That is a major improvement, and I am very happy to see that added in. Fixed, rather. Combat is not random battles, as in like the little flashy heartbeat screen flashes to black and white for a little bit before enemies pop up on the screen. The enemies are already on the screen. You run into the enemy by moving forward a few screens, and then you have to take them out. And so it's kind of like seamless loading of the randomish battles, and it's still X amount of enemies on the screen at a time. For example, you have a map of, say, let's pull out our handy pen and paper here. Let's say you got a map and you're in this hallway. You're trying to go here into this big boxed room right here. So you're going into this big boxed room here, and you have each screen. You're moving seamlessly through various different screens. So this corridor is a single screen. So once you run through here and you go that way, this is a single screen. Okay? So once you run into here, you're in a second screen. And then once you reach into this room, you're in a third screen. So you have 3 chances to encounter enemies, rather than just having random battles as you're walking through this area like you would in Parasite Eve 1. Each screen gives you a chance to have a battle, because the enemies might be patrolling the hallways or running about in this room, and you have to target your enemies as you would. So once you cleared out the enemies in, for example, this hallway, they don't come back until after a few story cutscenes. After you get a few story cutscenes, they might fill these hallways back up with new enemies. You come back, you wipe them back out as you're going backtracking the other way. Instead of going this way, you might be going this way, etc., etc., etc. It's all fine, it's all serviceable. I have no problems with the battles itself. The guns are a lot better than the first game, though I miss the customizability of being able to enhance the power of your guns. I also miss the level up system. Your character, Aya, does not level up during the whole game. If you want to increase her HP, you have to put on different equiptions. You have to equip different armor pieces. Each armor piece has an HP boost and an MP boost. So picking up different pieces of armor will increase your HP by a certain parameter and your MP by a certain parameter. The MP is how you use your Parasite Eve energy. You can still level up the Parasite Eve energy abilities by obtaining experience. You obtain that through all sorts of random battles, through beating the game. You can level up your Parasite Eve energies. As the higher the level goes, it goes up to level 3, the less MP it requires to cast the spell. and I ended up not using most of them. I primarily used healing and status ailment fixing, and I think energy bullet and the pyro, the fire spell. Those are the only four that I used. There's a bunch more. There's like what was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe about 12 to 15 Parasite Eve spells. I can't remember off the top of my head because I didn't use them all. But there's a few for you to play around with if you want. The guns are where the fun is for the most part. There's a lot of good variety, and most of them can be used from the start all the way to the end of the game. If you picked up the mongoose in your second playthrough, you could use that gun from the start of the game all the way to the very end of the final boss, because the enemies don't necessarily get stronger in that sense of the word. You could still use your starting pistol for the most of the game if you were tenacious enough to do so. It just would be a little bit harder to use that starting pistol against the final boss than it would be to use other guns and other types of ammo. And the one thing that I really hated, though, I hated this in the first game, I hated it even more in the second game, is inventory limits. Like I mentioned, with inventory limits in the first game, you, for example, had maybe 7 inventory slots at the start of Parasite Eve 1. And then you could level up your item capacity up to 99 to carry up to 45 to 46 inventory items in your said inventory. You could use your entire inventory pool in and outside of battle. You could put whatever you want in there. Guns, armor, healing items, key items were also included here. You get a lot more key items in this game, but thankfully the key items take up their second separate inventory area, and they don't count towards filling up your finite inventory space. At first, you might think that the starting inventory is a lot better than the first game, and from a certain point of view, you are correct. 20 is a lot higher than 7. However, from the start of the game to the very end of the game, no matter how many new game pluses you go through, you will only ever have 20 inventory slots in your main inventory. You will come across a couple storage bins. For example, the trunk of your car. You could store up to 40 to 50 items, I don't know. And then you'll come across a second storage cabinet in the hotel, which has a few storage slots that you can store items in. And they don't stack, they don't go into different containers. Whatever you put into the trunk does not go into the cabinet. It's kind of like the Fallout games with that. You put stuff in one storage cabinet, you will have to walk back to that cabinet to grab whatever you put in there if you wanted to put it in this one that's in a different location. Backtracking is usually fine all the way up until the very end. Once you pass the no pass zone, you won't be able to backtrack. But until that point, which is right before you meet the military, you'll be able to backtrack and go wherever you want. Dry fields or the shelter and all that other stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that's not missable. There are some things that are. There are 2 endings, the good ending and the bad ending, and I do like how they kind of hide the good ending from you. You have to actually pay attention to your environment to figure that out. That's one of the good things over the first game that Parasite Eve 2 does, and I think it's more like a Resident Evil type of thing, is that you can interact with your surroundings. You can walk up to a wall and press X, and Aya will read off maybe a note that's on the wall or something. She will interact with anything around you, and you can get more lore about the world and about your surroundings by interacting with everything that you could see, because most things are interactable in regards to getting this type of background information. Story-wise, in the first game, you get your typical JRPG style of lengthy cutscenes, which I do prefer. In this time, you don't get those types of lengthy cutscenes. You get a couple here and there, but most of your story comes from interacting with the world around you, talking, interacting with all the objects and learning about what these things are. And as you yourself explore and investigate, you will learn about the story that way, a type of passive type of experience. I prefer the first game to the second game in regards to story, though I do like that you could do this in this game. If you combined it, give the lengthy story cutscenes to the first game and still be able to interact with the world as in the second game, that would be the best of both worlds to me. In regards to length, you could probably beat this in like 5 to 10 hours depending upon how good you are at the game. It's not that big at all. It is a lot smaller than Parasite Eve 1, that's for sure. There's no Chrysler building, that's for sure. Most of the levels are small, dry field, and then the shelter. That's all you got. The reason why it feels big is because you have to backtrack a lot. That's how they get you. You go through one area, you go to the other one, then you come back, then you go to this one, then you come back, then you go to this one. There's a lot of backtracking, and they refill the halls you had just passed with new monsters. So that's how you would progress with your guns and your level system with your battle points, which you can use as currency to buy new guns and ammunition and all that other stuff besides. You have two currencies, experience points for your Parasite Eve powers and BP for everything else, which BP is used for currency in the ammo shops. You can buy ammo, you can buy guns, you can buy armor, you can buy healing items, anything and everything can be found in these shops, and you have to have BP to buy them with. This is where we have the issue with the inventory, however, because if you remember in Parasite Eve 1, there are only two types of ammo. There is just ammo, which is stored in a single item slot called the ammo crate. This ammo pool can be used for every single gun that is not an RPG. The RPG has a second ammo pool called the rocket crate. Those are two separate ammo slots, just two slots for every gun in the game. In Parasite Eve 2, it is a little bit different. You, for example, have your pistol. You have a pistol that takes up to 3 different types of ammo. And each different type of ammo will take up its own separate slot in your inventory. And you do have only 20 slots. So this will add up. There is your Spartan, your Hydra, and then your basic ammo. These 3 types have 3 different types of damage modifiers applied to them. And usually the one that's the most expensive to buy is the best ammo to use for that gun. Then you would have, for example, the Magnum. The Mongoose is the only Magnum in the game. You could get that in New Game Plus, etc. And it takes up to 2 different types of ammo types. You get your regular Magnum rounds and then the Maeda rounds. This is a Easter egg to Maeda from the first game. Maeda rounds are super effective against the mitochondria monsters that you'll encounter. So, equipping your Magnum with those type of bullets, which you can stack up to about 500, you will deal some major damage. They're very expensive to procure, though, so you'll have to stack up that BP. What else? We have the rifle, the assault rifle. There's only one type of ammo for that, so you're fine there. You have the shotgun, which takes up to, I believe, 3 types of shotgun ammo rounds. You have the grenade launcher with 3 different types of grenade launcher rounds. There's a lot of different type of ammos, and each one takes up a single slot in your inventory. So, by the end of the game, if you want, for example, 1 Magnum and 1 ammo for the Magnum, 1 rifle and 1 ammo for the rifle, one shotgun and one ammo for the shotgun, and one grenade launcher and one ammo for the grenade launcher. That is 8 slots out of the 20 that you have in your total. And you'll also have an armor that you'll be equipping to your character, so that's 9 out of the 20 slots for your total. You're also going to want to keep some accessories, such as the GPS, maybe the medicine wheel, maybe some other types of accessories that will modify things. For example, the GPS is the only way you'll get a sort of mini-map as you're running around, and in battle, it will point out where your enemies are. So you're going to want to have that in your inventory to be able to use it in battle. Otherwise, you're going to be pretty lost. The medicine wheel gives you better drops when you're killing monsters and stuff like that. So if you want more rare drops, more rare items, you're going to want to keep that on you. And there's a bunch of other things besides that you can use. And then I have to talk about attachments. This is another thing that I really absolutely despise about Parasite Eve 2, is attachments. Not only do you have 20 slots in your inventory total, period, that's it. You also have attachments. When you put an armor piece on, you have a certain number of attachments that you can put onto this armor piece, which you can enhance with belt pouches, etc., to have a maximum of 10 slots. These things that you put in your attachments are the only things that you can bring into battle with you. For example, you could have 5 healing items in your 20-slot inventory, but if you only attach one of the 5 healing items, in battle, you will only have access to that singular one healing item. It doesn't matter if you have 5. If you didn't attach them, you won't have access to them. This includes your guns. For example, if you're fighting a boss and you need access to both a grenade launcher and your typical magnum and maybe even a shotgun, then you're going to have 6 slots because you need the gun and the ammo type. So you have 6 slots for those 3 guns, and then you'll have up to 4 slots for everything else. And as I said, you're going to have one for GPS and maybe one for the medicine wheel. So that's 2 attachment slots right away. So you only have 2 free spaces for healing items of whatever purpose that you need. Maybe one to heal some status ailments. Maybe one to just heal you, period. You 10 slots, I found, was just not enough. It was very irritating. It was very aggravating. The limited inventory. You already have 20, period, which is like less than half of what I had in Parasite Eve 1. The game is annoying enough as it is. Why limit me even more? And it just really, really got on my nerves. It really did. Maybe it's just because I'm just not a fan of the survival horror genre for the PS1 era. I'm just not a fan of arbitrarily limited inventories. You already have a limited inventory as it is. Why limit it even more? You're just making the game more annoying for me. It's not making the game harder. You're making it annoying because it already would have been. It's these types of artificial difficulties that get on my nerves. Restricting my movement is an artificial difficulty. It's not actual difficulty. If I had full range movement, the game would be far easier. So, if the game would be far easier if I had full range movement, make it difficult even for full range movement. If you think that having a smaller inventory pool will make the game harder, give me my full inventory move and make the game harder, even if I had a full inventory pool. Do these concepts make sense to you? Arbitrary difficulties are annoying. Make it more natural to me. But that's neither here nor there. But that's your inventory, that's your gunplay. How's the story? Well, the story, as I said, the story feels like it was written by the guy who wrote Resident Evil. Instead of the mitochondria thing being controlled by Eve, it is now a manufactured virus by some corporation, some scientist person, Aya has been cloned, and there is a clone of Aya that is running around in this underground facility, and she's being used to control the mitochondria monsters, much like Eve controlled the mitochondria monsters. And people can turn into mitochondria monsters now instead of just turning into little orange puddles of goo or spontaneously combusting like they did in the first game. So right away, the lore of the first game has been completely slashed and ripped and tattered into pieces on the ground and has been rebuilt into a Resident Evil clone. The easiest way we could describe the two games is Parasite Eve 1 is a JRPG with survival horror elements. Parasite Eve 2 is a survival horror game with JRPG elements. The two concepts are flipped on their heads. JRPG fans may like Parasite Eve 1 more. That's me. Survival horror fans may like Parasite Eve 2 more. And that's not me. So there you go with that. The story is different. They change a lot of things. Some things I can appreciate. There are some characters that get introduced that I really like. I like the Pierce character. Pierce is a really fun guy. Even though he feels like Maeda 2.0, he feels like he was just written to be Maeda in the game. He's just a new Maeda. Aya has been transferred from the police department to the FBI, and she crosses the country, finding all sorts of mitochondria monsters, because apparently some left New York and got out and they're spreading or whatever. Aya having her powers still is interesting, though she has to relearn them, and that's interesting as well, and which makes me think that maybe in the first Parasite Eve, the good, true ending with Aya losing her powers, this one has her regaining those powers. So, however, they don't really try to connect them any too deeply, but it's the ending. Which ending? It just feels like it's the true ending. It's whatever with that. They don't. If you're trying to think too hard about it, at least it makes a little sense to have her try to relearn her powers, because she loses her powers at the end of the true ending, etc., etc., etc. But like I said, there's a virus now that you can use to infect people and have them forcefully mutate into mitochondria monsters. It's not the same. It's not the same concept. It's not the same lore. And I don't know how you can make that make sense given what we have in the first game and the science of that first game. I don't know how they use that to make this concept. It seems kind of forced, and there's a lot of just don't think about it being used to cover it up. Overall, if you don't care about Parasite Eve 1 or the movie or the book, and you just want to play a fun survival horror game, then definitely Parasite Eve 2 is one of the better ones. It is very well played. The level designs are just as good as the best of the Resident Evils, though I think the Resident Evil fans will probably say Resident Evil is still better, though this holds up in that ballpark, in my opinion. What else can I talk about? The cutscenes. Yes, like I said, the cutscenes in this game are fantastic. Like, the budget had to have gone towards that. This game is 2 discs long, and I think the bulk of the information on both of those discs went to these cutscenes, because they are so high quality. Like, there's such good quality in a certain particular scene in the shower with the water literally beating off the skin, the hair, each singular strand has singular movement, the water dynamics and the gravity effects. It all looks really, really good. for a PlayStation 1 game, it's probably one of the best graphical abilitiness on the system. And it makes sense given that it's 1999, but still, it's one of the best looking cutscenes I've ever seen for this console. It's better than a lot of PlayStation 2 games, in my opinion. But outside of the CG cutscenes, the actual gameplay itself, the models are a little bit upgraded from Parasite Eve 1. They are a little bit upgraded. Where the first game felt like Final Fantasy VIII models, the second game feels more like Resident Evil models. The running animations are different for each person. The walking animations are different for each person. It's decent. It's good. It's a solid game. The reason why I don't like it as much as Parasite Eve 1 is because I have different gaming preferences. I like JRPGs. I loved the gameplay concept that Parasite Eve 1 started with, and I really wanted to play an enhanced and improved version of that game's gameplay. I was not looking for a Resident Evil clone. I was not looking to play a Resident Evil type of game. I wanted to play a Parasite Eve 1 type of game. So I didn't get what I wanted in Parasite Eve 2. That doesn't mean it's not a bad it's a bad game. That doesn't mean it's not a good game. It's a fantastic game. It is. And that ending, the ending with the clone and all that stuff is fantastic. I think it's one of the happier endings that you could have had to the game. I heard that the third birthday does a lot of unsatisfying things, so oh boy, do I have some stuff to look at for that one. Good thing I don't plan to play that one anytime soon. But that's Parasite Eve 2. It's good, it's just not my preference.